My name is Eleanor Brooks, a 75-year-old widow, and my life in Willow Creek, Oregon is like a still life painting, simple, rustic, and seemingly unremarkable. Every morning, as the sun creeps behind the green hills, I wake up at 5:30 without an alarm clock. The habit has been ingrained in my body and mind for decades. I never rush. My breakfast is simple: a bowl of hot oatmeal mixed with honey from my neighbor's bees, accompanied by a cup of strong black tea sipped by a window that opens onto my small garden, where the hydrangeas, roses, and marigolds I planted myself quietly bloom under the clear morning mist. My house is on Maple Street, a tree-lined street that winds between old wooden houses. It's just a normal one-story house, not too big, but not too small, with a red-tiled roof that's been stained by time. Everything in the house is well kept and neat, but there's nothing outstanding enough to make people stop by. Friendly neighbors like Mrs. Miller and Mr. Henderson often smile and wave when they see me watering the flowers or trimming the hedges. They assume I'm a widow living comfortably on a modest pension from my late husband. They ask me about the weather, the apple season, and the little things around town. I just smiled in response, nodded, and listened, keeping my face so calm that no one would suspect that I had been hiding a secret for years. I was the owner of the Willow Table, the most famous restaurant in the area, where visitors do not mind driving hours just to taste traditional dishes made from the freshest ingredients. After breakfast, I put on a thin beige coat, sometimes an old sweater I knitted myself, and a wide-brimmed hat to cover my graying hair. I walked out to the garage, where my old turquoise Ford Focus still sat quietly as if in hibernation. The engine started slowly, making a hoarse sound, as if it were also entering its twilight years like me. I backed the car up gently, then slowly drove along the familiar maple road. The first rays of morning sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting flickering streaks of light on the windshield, as if the town were waking up from a peaceful dream. I drove slowly, just enough to breathe in the fresh morning air and watch the still sleepy rhythm of life around me. Every time I drove past the center of town, where the Willow Table was located, I glanced in its direction. The old-fashioned stone and wood building, with its softly carved willow sign, was both elegant and homely. It was unpretentious, blending in with the peaceful landscape that characterizes Willow Creek. I often saw a few tourists waiting outside the door, eyes eager for the first breakfast of the day. A small smile crossed my lips, a smile of quiet pride. They had no idea that the old woman driving the old car was the one behind everything that made the place special. It was a secret I had kept carefully hidden for years, partly because I didn't want my private life to be disturbed by the attention, but partly, and perhaps more importantly, it was because of my complicated relationship with my only son, Nathan. He and his wife, Lauren, believed that I was a poor country mother and perhaps an embarrassment to the glamorous lifestyle they led, and I let them believe it, quite deliberately. But at some point, things had to change. After leaving my peaceful home, I didn't drive straight to the front door of the Willow Table like a regular diner. Instead, I turned into the small alley behind the restaurant, the familiar path reserved for staff and deliveries. My old Ford Focus was parked next to the early morning food trucks. I gently opened the back door, stepping into the familiar space of the kitchen and warehouse. Immediately, the aromas of fresh bread, freshly ground coffee, and fresh herbs filled the air, embracing me like a warm old blanket, a scent that has followed me for more than 40 years of my life. I headed upstairs to my office, a small but cozy room with a worn oak desk piled high with papers, books, and memorabilia. The morning light streamed through the large windows, illuminating the walls with photographs and certificates. It was the story of the Willow Table, from a fragile dream to a regional culinary icon. The frames contained old newspaper articles praising the restaurant, prestigious certificates from chef associations, and handwritten letters from customers expressing their love. Each piece was a reminder of the journey that my husband James and I had worked hard to build from nothing. I stopped in front of a black and white photo that had yellowed over the years. In it, I, in my 30s, was standing proudly in front of a small restaurant with only 4 tables. That was the Willow Table in its early days, when it was just a fragile hope in everyday life. I clearly remember that day. James and I pooled our pennies, painted each wall, and set up each table and chair. He was always the first to believe in my skills, my ambition, and my ability to lead. "You can do it, Eleanor," he once said. "Our dream will grow every day." I stared at my bright smile in the photo, an innocent, idealistic smile of youth. Memories of sleepless nights, tired but happy mornings with James came flooding back, warm yet bitter, like a root that silently nurtured everything I have today. While I was still lost in my thoughts, there was a gentle knock on the door. It was Clara, my CEO. She was in her 50s, quick, sharp, and extremely loyal. Clara was my trusted right-hand woman, the only person I entrusted with the responsibility of running the entire restaurant. Following Clara was Sophie, the talented head chef of the Willow Table. At 40, she had bright eyes, skillful hands, and a soul passionate about food. To Sophie, I was not only her boss, but also her teacher, her spiritual mother, the first person to recognize her talent and give her the opportunity to shine. And finally, Henry, the dining room manager, a calm, well-groomed gentleman who had been with the restaurant for more than 20 years. He was always the embodiment of sophistication and standards in every diner experience. We started our regular meeting as usual. I sat down in the old leather chair behind my desk, my eyes changing, now taking on the look of a true leader, determined and responsible. No longer Eleanor in her hand-knitted sweater at home, but the head of a major brand. We discussed the summer menu, the expansion of the outdoor dining area, and financial reports. The conversations were smooth, reflecting the remarkable teamwork and efficiency of the team. I listened carefully to every idea, gave advice, and always had the final say. I had great faith in them, and they never let me down. In the middle of the meeting, I turned to Clara and reminded her in a low voice, "You know, Clara, this is still absolutely confidential, especially from Nathan." My voice dropped when I mentioned my son's name. Clara nodded sympathetically. She knew the complicated relationship between Nathan and me. She knew that Nathan and his wife Lauren had long thought of me as just another poor, backward mother with nothing to be proud of. They had no idea that the old mother they had deliberately avoided was the owner of a large and powerful business, built with perseverance and relentless intelligence. I kept that secret for many years, both to protect my own world and to keep Nathan from feeling pressured or hurt. But deep down, I also wanted to know if my son could love and respect me just because I was his mother, not because of money or fame. But it seems I was wrong. The distance between us grew bigger and bigger, and the indifference and coldness in Nathan's eyes every time he looked at me could no longer be hidden. I knew it was time to seriously rethink about this secret and about my own future in that relationship. My relationship with Nathan, my only son, has never been exactly stable. It's like a thin thread, so tight that the slightest tug could snap it. Nathan left Willow Creek years ago, moving to Portland, a bustling, flashy city that's the polar opposite of the quiet, peaceful place I've been living my entire life. Now he's a successful man, at least by society's standards and in his own eyes. With a job in finance, a high salary, an expensive apartment in a trendy neighborhood, and a lifestyle that doesn't shy away from showing off, Nathan believes he's reached the top. His wife, Lauren, is the same. Beautiful, fashionable, always wearing perfect makeup and never repeat dresses. Their world was very different from mine. not only geographically, but also in terms of values. In their eyes, I was just an old woman, living in an old house in a small town, driving an old Ford and wearing clothes that were so simple that it couldn't be simpler. To them, all of that was evidence of my failure. They couldn't hide their disapproving looks, sometimes with half-joking words, sometimes with uncomfortable silence. Nathan repeatedly suggested that I should sell the house and move to Portland to live with them, as if he were doing me a favor. Lauren regularly sent me luxury fashion catalogs with a gentle but meaningful message. You should try to renew yourself, be more modern. Those words were like needles stabbing my heart, but I didn't react. I chose to remain silent, not because I was weak, but because I wanted to wait and see if Nathan could love his mother with true feelings, or only if she became someone who fit his flashy standards. That afternoon, as I was pruning roses in the backyard, the phone rang. I took off my gloves, wiped my hands on my apron, and looked at the screen. Nathan. I'm listening, son, I said calmly. Nathan's voice rang out, politely distant. Hi, Mom. Lauren and I are planning a dinner this Sunday to celebrate our new contract. Can you come? The remark sounded friendly, but I knew my son. It didn't come from genuine desire, but from social obligation. And then, as I expected, Nathan added in a hesitant but clear voice, Mom, could you dress a little more modernly? My friends are all people of status. I don't want you to be out of place among them. I clutched the phone. A wave of pain rose inside me, simmering like a suppressed storm. Another stab at my pride. I understand, Nathan, I said, trying to keep my voice even. I'll try. Okay, Mom, I'll send you the address later, Nathan said curtly and hung up. I stood still in the quiet garden, my gardening gloves still on. In that moment, the pain was no longer a vague feeling. It became a clear, deep, cold cut. I looked at the roses I had just pruned. Beautiful, proud, and not needing to change to please anyone. And what about me? I had tried so many times to accommodate, to be patient, to understand my son, but in return, all I received was a cold, subtle contempt. In Nathan's eyes, I was nothing more than a rustic, old-fashioned mother. I thought back to the rare times Nathan and Lauren visited Willow Creek. They never stayed more than a night. Lauren complained about the old smell in the house, the lack of a dishwasher, the small bathroom. Nathan talked endlessly about international travel, about tailored suits, expensive watches, and high-profile relationships. Each story seemed designed to make me feel small. They had no idea, and I never told them, that I had secretly paid for Nathan's first trip to Europe, that the Rolex he always wore was a gift I had saved for. I kept quiet, not because I had nothing to say, but because I wanted my son to stand on his own 2 feet, to be proud of what he had worked for, not what he had been given. But perhaps my silence was misunderstood. Perhaps Nathan thought I had no self-respect, that I was a burden, a stain to be hidden. The moment he asked me to dress more modernly, just to avoid embarrassing him in front of his friends, I suddenly realized all the things I had endured over the years had accumulated. Something inside me broke, not loudly, not violently, but with a cold and clear change. Perhaps it was time for me to stop being silent. Perhaps I needed to let my son know. The mother he had always looked down on was not as small as he thought. That fateful Sunday finally arrived. I drove my old Ford from Willow Creek to Portland, a nearly 3-hour journey measured not just in time, but also in the weight of my thoughts. Nathan's words echoed in my head like a sad song. The way he and Lauren always looked at me with judgmental eyes, the cold concern that was only meant to fulfill a duty. I chose to wear an ash gray wool dress, a silk scarf wrapped lightly around my neck, and the low-heeled shoes that had accompanied me for years. It was all I had, just enough to keep Nathan from losing face, and just enough to keep me from betraying myself. When I arrived at their luxury apartment complex, I found myself in a strange world, a place of shiny cars parked in rows, where everything was priced by its price. I rang the bell. The door opened. Lauren stood there with her familiar bland smile. "Hi, Mom," she said, her tone creepy. Nathan stepped out behind her, no more than a nod in exchange for a hug. No greetings, no gestures of affection. I wasn't surprised. I'd learned not to expect it. Inside the apartment, crystal chandeliers reflected off expensive paintings, casting a suffocating glow. Everything here was shiny and cold. Lauren's parents, Richard and Margaret, were already seated. They were the epitome of urban wealth. Immaculately dressed, heavily perfumed, and constantly scrutinizing. When I walked in, Margaret immediately scanned me from head to toe with a mixture of pity and disdain. Then she tilted her head to Lauren and whispered, loud enough for me to hear, "You see, your mother is still the same. She doesn't keep up with the times." Richard squinted, sipped his red wine, and then smiled faintly at Nathan. "I hear your house in Willow Creek still has a tin roof? Nathan, you should help her fix it up. It doesn't look like our family." Each word was like a small knife, cutting into my heart. Slowly, coldly. I looked at Nathan, hoping for a little sympathy, a rebuttal. But he just avoided my eyes, bowed his head, and changed the subject by talking about numbers, deals, big partners, as if all that shame had nothing to do with him. Just like that, he let me suffer each insult in silence, while he himself excitedly showed off as if his success could make up for it all. The dinner was a high society affair. Stories of European travels, Swiss watch collections, and powerful inside friends. No one asked about my health. No one mentioned Willow Creek, except for comparison. I sat there, an invisible figure, a shadow no one cared to notice, but I remained silent. I had learned to swallow my heartache deep inside, until Lauren, in a falsely bright tone, suddenly exclaimed, "Oh, by the way, Nathan and I have decided on a location for our 7th wedding anniversary party." She grinned, turning to everyone as if announcing a major accomplishment. "We booked the Willow table at Willow Creek." I paused. The chopsticks in my hand froze in midair. My heart skipped a beat. The Willow table. The name rang out like a call from memory, not just a restaurant. It was my brainchild, the place I had spent my whole life building. Every brick, every dish, every light was a dream I had turned into reality. They were talking about it proudly, but they had no idea that I was the one behind the glory. "I hear the food is great and the atmosphere is very classy," Lauren continued, her eyes shining with excitement. "Do you know that place, Eleanor? It's in Willow Creek." Nathan nodded in agreement, his face full of pride. "That's right, Mom. We booked a table almost 3 months in advance. My friends will be impressed." I looked straight into his eyes, no longer hopeful, but strangely calm. Then I looked at Lauren, at Richard and Margaret, people drunk on the illusion of luxury, blind to real values. A wave of emotion washed over me, not anger or hurt, but awakening. Here they were, boasting about the place I had built with all my love and effort, while I was left out, as if I had no place in my own creation. I knew in that moment that this was my moment, an unexpected opportunity to end the years of silent contempt, to speak out not out of anger, but out of dignity. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to prove anything. I just wanted them to see me, not as a country mother, not as a burden, but as a person with values, with strength, with a proud past they had never known. I sat up straight, feeling strangely light. Tonight, I would tell it all. And then I would leave, not in silence as usual, but as a woman who had finally regained her voice. A few days after that stifling dinner in Portland, I returned to my familiar home in Willow Creek. The air was as calm as ever, blue skies, chirping birds, the scent of fresh grass seeping through the cracks in the windows. But my heart was not so calm. A storm was raging inside me. I had never felt so violated, so cruelly marginalized. I had always endured, chosen to keep my life a secret, in the fragile belief that one day Nathan would understand who I was, beyond what he saw on the outside, the rusty tin roof and the plain clothes. But clearly, that belief was wrong. As I was watering the red geraniums on the porch, the phone rang. Nathan's name appeared. I paused, staring at the screen for a long moment, sensing something was wrong. Finally, I pressed answer. Mom. Nathan's voice came back, urgent and a little confused. I'm sorry, but I don't think you should come to my anniversary party at the Willow table. A chill ran down my spine. I had sensed it, but I hoped I was wrong. Why? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. I just thought you'd feel uncomfortable with my friends. They're all successful people, used to high-class environments. You understand, right? Nathan faltered, trying to come up with an excuse that sounded reasonable. But I could hear what was behind the words. He was afraid of me. Afraid that I would destroy the perfect image he had built in front of his wife's family. Afraid that I, his old mother with her rustic demeanor and simple lifestyle, would make him lose face in that high-class crowd. I understand, Nathan. You don't have to worry, I replied shortly, trying to keep my voice from shaking with pain. Then I hung up without waiting for him to say more. I stood motionless on the porch, my arms hanging limply by my sides. The garden around me was still as vibrant and lush as ever, but inside me was a dark abyss. The pain was no longer just hurt, but a fire of anger, smoldering but burning fiercely. I had poured my blood, sweat, and youth into building the Willow Table, a restaurant from scratch into a culinary icon of Willow Creek. I had done it so that my son could have a bright future. And yet today, in the very place I had built it, my son wanted me gone. I knew right then and there I couldn't live in the shadows any longer. My silence had only made them think I was inferior, weak, and worthless. They had to know the truth, not because I needed to be praised, but because I had to prove myself. I needed Nathan to understand that the mother he thought was so lowly had actually created the very thing he admired and praised without even realizing it. I took a deep breath, feeling as if a great weight had been lifted from my heart. The decision had been made. I entered the house, grabbed my car keys, and drove straight to the Willow Table. When I entered the second-floor office, I saw Clara, Sophie, and Henry busying themselves. They looked up when I appeared. They must have noticed the unusually serious look on my face. Clara, Sophie, Henry, we need a meeting, I said firmly. The three of them stopped immediately, looking at me in surprise. Nathan just called me, I said, keeping my voice steady. He doesn't want me to attend his anniversary party. At this very restaurant. The three of them looked at each other, stunned. Clara was the first to react. What, madam? How could that happen? I nodded slowly. I will go to that party, but not as an invited or uninvited mother. I will appear as the hostess of the Willow Table. In the silence, the three of them looked from surprise to understanding. Then, almost simultaneously, they nodded. They had worked with me long enough to know that when I made up my mind, there was no going back. What should we do, ma'am? Sophie asked, her voice firm. I smiled slightly, but my eyes didn't soften. We're going to throw the perfect party, the one we've ever had. And when the time is right, Sophie, you'll introduce me as the founder and owner of this place. From that moment on, the plan was as clear as a pencil stroke on a blueprint. We discussed the special menu. The dishes had to be exquisite and impressive. Clara and Henry began to scan the space. Every chair, every flower, every light fixture had to be perfect. Sophie enthusiastically sketched each new dish idea as if she were part of a historical moment. We worked as a team, in sync and dedicated, each with a different mission, but with the same goal to create an evening that no one would forget. Not just for Nathan and Lauren, but for me to step into the light, to affirm that I was not ordinary, not inferior, and certainly not a shadow on the sidelines of their lives. I wanted them to know the value of a person is not in the flashy exterior, but in what they have done, what they have lived, sacrificed, and believed in. The days leading up to Nathan and Lauren's wedding anniversary were hectic, but everything I did was carefully calculated. I spent time preparing for my appearance in a neat and thoughtful manner. I didn't need admiring glances or flashy ostentation. What I wanted was an appearance that exuded the temperament of a seasoned woman, full of dignity and majesty. I opened my wardrobe, not choosing the gorgeous evening gowns that people usually wear on special occasions. Instead, I chose a dark navy blue silk dress, elegant in style, with a soft, naturally flowing fabric, highlighting the elegance and fortitude of a woman who had gone through many events. I carefully tied my silver hair back and applied light makeup to add radiance to my face without losing my seasonedness. I was not only the restaurant owner, but also the mother they had never truly recognized. A woman of fortitude, sophistication, and fortitude. While I was getting my appearance in order, the atmosphere at the Willow table was equally intense. I went over every detail myself. I went over the menu with Sophie, making sure that every dish was perfect, not only in taste but also in presentation. The truffle cream soup had to be rich and fragrant. The herb-baked salmon had to be marinated and grilled to perfection. The chocolate mousse for dessert had to be smooth and melt in your mouth, a sweet note that ended the symphony of tastes. I walked through the banquet rooms, checking every table, every cutlery, every small candle, making sure everything was of the highest order and elegance. Looking at the diligent staff, I could see their eyes shining with confidence and dedication. My meticulousness was not simply to surprise. It was an affirmation of class, a response to the prejudices that had weighed heavily on my shoulders for many years. While testing the sound system, a system I had invested a lot in, wanting every sound in the party to be well-rounded and classy, suddenly an old jazz song played. That familiar melody took me back to a distant memory. It was the song that James and I used to listen to in our early days when we first opened our first restaurant. The notes brought me back to a simple but dreamy moment, a time when we had nothing in our hands but love and a big dream. I remembered James, my late husband, who always believed in me and stood by me as a solid support. He was a calm, kind, and optimistic person, the one who constantly reminded me to believe in my own abilities. I remember the small kitchen with only 4 old wooden tables where we cooked, served, and washed dishes until late at night. There were nights when I was so tired that I could barely stand, but James's encouraging gaze gave me strength. He once said, "You are talented, Eleanor. Never let anyone define you by your appearance or your background. You deserve the world." It was he who instilled in me the belief that a person's true worth is not in what they own, but in what they contribute and persevere to build. Tears fell silently like the memories that came back to me, both sweet and painful, but my eyes did not waver. I did not do all this for revenge or to show off. I did it to make Nathan understand. Work, dedication, and kindness are the values that last. I wanted him to see, more clearly than ever, that the mother he once considered a burden, a poor country bumpkin, was in fact the woman who laid the foundation for everything he enjoyed and bragged about today. And above all, this is my way of remembering James, who always believed in me, who always believed in the Willow table. Standing up, claiming ownership, is not just a way of defending myself, but a way of keeping my promise to the deceased that I would never let our hard work be taken for granted. From the soft lighting, the soft jazz music, to the exquisite dishes, all are the crystallization of a great love, a long journey filled with sacrifice and pride. I was ready. No more shaking, no more feeling abandoned, just determination and a clear desire to be my true self and affirm my true worth to those who had wronged me for so long. Nathan and Lauren's anniversary dinner at the Willow Table was a lavish affair, a calculated affair. When I arrived, the restaurant was packed, dressed in the splendor I had dreamed of. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting shimmering bands of light on the white tablecloths. Soft jazz music mingled with the sounds of lively conversation and clinking glasses, all of it creating an atmosphere of almost artificial luxury. I didn't enter through the front door. Instead, I took the secret route, a narrow hallway that led directly to my second-floor office. Through the familiar frosted glass, I quietly surveyed the banquet hall below. From there, I could see every smug expression on Nathan and Lauren's faces as they greeted the guests. Lauren laughed loudly, constantly waving her arms to show off Nathan's designer dress and diamond watch, and not forgetting to emphasize the luxury of the party. "This restaurant is amazing, isn't it? We were lucky to get a reservation," she said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. Richard and Margaret, Lauren's parents, were no less dramatic, nodding proudly as if they were the ones who created this space. They raised their glasses, laughed loudly, completely unaware that the countrywoman they had once despised was watching their every move from the shadows and preparing to close the curtain on the biggest play of her life. The party was slowly coming to a climax. After Nathan and Lauren's long and self-satisfied speeches about love and career achievements, the lights in the banquet hall suddenly dimmed. The music also faded. A wave of silence quickly swept through the room. All eyes turned to a small stage that had just been lit up in the center. The signal had arrived. My heart skipped a beat, but I remained absolutely calm. Under the spotlight, Sophie, my head chef, stepped out. She was wearing a pure white uniform. Her face exuded dignity and pride. She took the microphone, her voice clear and full of emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen, I am Sophie, the head chef of the Willow Table. Today, I am honored to introduce an extraordinary woman who has dedicated her life to building and developing this restaurant from scratch. A person who has turned a small dream into a respected culinary icon. I would like to introduce the real owner of the Willow Table, Ms. Eleanor Brooks." The room fell silent, a silence so thick, so long, it felt as if time had stopped. All eyes turned to the wings, where Sophie had pointed. Nathan, Lauren, Richard, and Margaret were frozen. Their eyes were wide, their mouths agape. Their previous smug expressions were gone, leaving their faces confused, shocked, and panicked. They looked at each other as if they were desperately searching for an explanation for this unbelievable moment. I stepped out from behind the scenes, wearing a soft navy silk dress, my silver hair neatly tied in a bun. I walked slowly, exuding calmness and charisma. Exquisite jewelry sparkled under the lights. High heels lightly clattered on the wooden floor. I didn't look at anyone for too long, just glanced at the stunned eyes of the crowd, then stopped at the central table, where Nathan was sitting, his face drained of color. Lauren bowed her head, not daring to look up at him. I stepped onto the stage, took the microphone from Sophie. My voice rang out clearly, calmly, and powerfully. "Congratulations, Nathan and Lauren, on your 7th wedding anniversary. I am so happy that you have chosen the Willow Table, the home I have spent my life building, to celebrate this important occasion." I paused for a moment, my eyes lingering on Nathan's stunned face, then gently moved to Richard and Margaret, who were trembling and speechless. "And to congratulate you, As well as to thank you for accompanying the Willow Table all these years, I would like to take the liberty of paying for the entire cost of tonight's party. A few murmurs broke out, a few isolated claps echoed through the tense air, but they quickly died down as silence fell once more. I said nothing more. I just nodded briefly to Sophie and handed the microphone back. Without looking back at the faces of humiliation and panic, I turned and walked, slowly, deliberately, off the stage, back to my office. I left Nathan's family in a sea of awkward and humiliating silence. Whispers began to rise throughout the banquet hall. Curious, questioning, gossiping eyes turned to their table. I knew, tonight, the Willow Table would not only be a celebration of Nathan and Lauren's love, but also a revelation, a bitter lesson they would never forget. After that fateful night, my phone started ringing nonstop. Nathan, Lauren, Richard, and Margaret called and texted nonstop. Their voicemails were filled with panic, apologizing endlessly, trying to beg for my forgiveness. There were desperate lines, mixed with a hint of anger that threatened to intimidate me if I stayed silent. "Mom, please pick up the phone. I was wrong. I'm sorry. Eleanor, please give us a chance to explain. We really don't know anything." But I didn't answer any of their calls, nor did I leave any messages. I put my phone on silent, put it aside, and continued my daily routine as if nothing had happened. I knew they were panicking, not just from humiliation, but also from fear that I would do something with their assets. Their panic was not born of genuine remorse, but from fear of losing what they thought was theirs. And in that fear, their true colors were revealed without any concealment. But I had no intention of punishing them with prolonged silence. I would act, in my own way, a way that I believed was fair, right, and unquestionable. A few days later, I met with Thomas, our longtime family lawyer. He was in his 70s, with silky white hair and sharp eyes behind thick glasses. He had been a trusted friend of my husband, James, and he had always maintained integrity in everything he did. His office smelled of old paper, leather, and printer ink, a comforting atmosphere. We sat across from each other in a quiet, solemn atmosphere. "Hello, Eleanor. How are you?" Thomas began in a warm, calm voice. He didn't need to ask much. He understood me. "I'm fine, Thomas. I'm here to talk about wills." I got straight to the point. Thomas nodded, opened his notebook, and listened. I began to lay out my plan clearly, without hesitation. "The Willow Table," I said, "will be transferred to Clara and Sophie upon my death. They have been with me all along, pouring their blood, sweat, and tears into this place. They deserve to enjoy the fruits of their labor." I asked Thomas to set up a trust fund to ensure they had the resources to maintain and grow the restaurant, improve the facilities, and protect the lives of their employees. I also wanted to establish a special pension fund for former employees when they retired, a sincere thank you to those who had helped build the soul of this place. Thomas took notes attentively, occasionally glancing up at me with awe. He had seen my every move and understood the value of what I said. "I also want to create a foundation in the name of James and Eleanor Brooks," I continued. "It will provide scholarships to talented young chefs who lack the means to develop. It will also support small businesses in Willow Creek, those struggling to survive in these harsh times. I want to leave behind not just a legacy, but a set of values, a belief that will be passed on to the community that I have been involved in all my life." That was my way of remembering James, a man who believed in supporting others rather than accumulating wealth for himself. Finally, I mentioned Nathan's part. "And Nathan," I said, my voice low but clear, "will only take the little house on Maple Street and a living wage. Not enough to live in luxury, but not enough to be destitute. I want him to work for himself, to stand on his own 2 feet, to understand the true value of every penny he earns with his own hands." Thomas looked at me, considering. "Are you really sure, Eleanor?" Nathan might be shocked. "I am sure, Thomas." I nodded, my gaze unwavering. I did not do this to punish my son. I did this to teach him something he has never understood his whole life. A person's worth is not in the wealth they inherit, but in how they face life, in their efforts and self-respect. My legacy is not just money. It is a lesson, a message. Thomas nodded slowly. I understand, Eleanor. I will draft your will according to your wishes, and I trust you are doing the right thing. I know Nathan will be shocked. He may be angry, resentful, but I believe that this is the only way he will have a chance to truly see himself. I don't want my son to live in my shadow. I want him to learn to walk on his own, even if it's late. And to me, that is the most precious legacy. One chilly morning, a few weeks after I'd completed my will, I was standing by the delivery area at the willow table, inspecting the boxes of vegetables and the trays of meat and fish that had just arrived. The air was crisp and fresh, with the scent of fresh vegetables, freshly baked bread, and the salty tang of seafood, a symphony of life and hard work. I was instructing a staff member to arrange the bundles of cabbage when a sleek black sedan pulled up in front of the employee entrance. The door opened. Richard and Margaret stepped out. I wasn't surprised. I'd known this would happen. After the party and the series of missed calls, it was inevitable that they would show up. They were dressed to the extreme, Margaret in an expensive fur coat, Richard in a crisp suit, clutching a large gift box carefully wrapped in fancy gold paper. It was probably a piece of art, some expensive sculpture, I guessed. There was obvious guilt on their faces, but there was a calculating glint in their eyes, and a hint of awkwardness that couldn't be hidden. Mrs. Brooks. Richard spoke first, his voice noticeably softer than the last time we met. Gone was the arrogancy, replaced by hesitation and forced inquiry. We are truly sorry for what happened. We were so foolish and thoughtless. Please accept this gift as a token of our sincere apology. He held the box out to me, his expression as if he were gambling with his last shred of hope. Margaret immediately chimed in, trying to muster an apologetic smile that her nervously trembling lips betrayed. That's right, Eleanor. We were wrong. We really didn't know. Please be merciful. I looked straight at them, unblinking. My gaze was sharp as a knife, silent but absolutely unyielding. I did not even glance down at the gift box. Richard and Margaret, I said, my voice calm but cold, each word falling like ice to the stone floor. I do not accept this apology, and that gift, unnecessary. The answer was like a straight slash. They stopped, stunned. The inquiring look on their faces instantly disappeared, replaced by confusion on their foreheads and lips. I didn't give them a chance to respond. A person's worth, I continued, my voice steady but sharp, is not determined by what they possess, but by how they treat others. You looked down on me based on what you thought I had or didn't have. You belittled me, you insulted me, and that I can't forgive. Richard and Margaret were speechless. Their faces were white, their eyes met, filled with worry and helplessness. Any pride they had had was completely extinguished. I knew very well the apology they brought today was not from remorse, but from fear for their property, after knowing that I was the true owner of the willow table. Without another word, Richard bowed his head and gently placed the gift box on the floor. He and Margaret turned and left, walking quickly as if running away. The black car rolled out of the alley, leaving behind the gorgeous box, lying alone in the morning sun, a naked symbol of hypocrisy and self-interest. I stood there, no longer angry, but deeply relieved. Their concern, if it could be called concern, had been all along to preserve their place in a legacy they thought was ready to fall into their hands. But that was no longer the case. I had drawn clear boundaries, and for the first time in years, I felt no compunction or regret. The willow table was more than a restaurant. It was a symbol of my resilience, my dignity, and my life. It had been a few weeks since my last confrontation with Richard and Margaret. Life in Willow Creek had settled back into a more normal rhythm, like a lake after a light rain. But this time, there was something quieter inside me, a deep peace. There was no longer the burden of concealment or the contemptuous looks. I had told the truth, and despite the inevitable consequences, I felt strangely light. One Tuesday afternoon, as I sat in my living room, sipping a cup of warm tea and rereading an old novel, the mailman appeared. Among the usual pile of mail, bills, advertisements, and magazines, a cream-colored envelope stood out. The paper was thick, and the handwriting was familiar, though now shakier and less sure. It was from Nathan. My heart skipped a beat. It had been a long time since Nathan had written to me. Before, it had been just hasty calls, short messages with shallow apologies, as if written just to ease my conscience. I held the envelope, feeling the vague weight in my hand, then slowly opened it. The contents of the letter surprised me more than I expected. There was no plea for money, no grievance against the will, no feeble justification for past actions. Instead, it was a long, heartfelt, handwritten letter filled with deep remorse. Dear Mom, he wrote, I don't know where to begin. I've been thinking about that night at the willow table for weeks, and about all the things I've done and said to you over the years. He frankly admitted the shallowness, selfishness, and sense of shame that had caused him to turn away from me. I was stupid, Mom. I always thought you were just an ordinary woman with nothing special to be proud of. I was ashamed of the old car you drove, the small, simple house you lived, the simple way you lived. I let Lauren and her parents dictate my thinking. The letter continued. But that night, when you stepped out in front of the entire room, when I learned that you were the one behind the willow table, my image of you collapsed. I realized how blind I had been. You were not the weak, ordinary woman I had thought you were. You were extraordinary. You had built a legacy from nothing. And I didn't see it. I was so caught up in chasing the glitz and glamour that I forgot where my true worth lay. Without a forced plea for forgiveness, Nathan wrote that he knew he didn't deserve to be forgiven so easily. He just wanted a chance to meet me alone, in a quiet place, so we could talk honestly and figure out how to fix what was broken. I'm not asking for anything, Mom. I just want to get to know you better. Not the mother I once looked at with disapproving eyes, but the woman who made something extraordinary happen. I'll wait until you're ready to answer. I read the letter several times. There was something in the tone that made me pause over each word. It was no longer the false urgency of the previous times. This time it was quiet, slow, thoughtful. Maybe the shock had made him look at himself. Maybe, for the first time in years, he truly understood me, not through my title or my fortune, but through the person I had been and still was. I didn't forgive right away. The damage Nathan had done couldn't be undone with a few words. But part of me realized this was an opportunity, not to erase the past, but to have a dialogue for two people who had been estranged to look at each other without prejudice. A few days later, after much deliberation, I sent Nathan a text. I agreed to meet him. The meeting was set for a small coffee shop tucked away in the suburb of Willow Creek, Country Corner, a quiet, cozy place with rustic wooden tables and soft music. Not my house, not his, and definitely not the Willow table. I wanted a neutral space, to start over if that were even possible. I remained cautious. Forgiveness is a journey, not a decision. But I had opened the first door, not for Nathan, but for myself. The upcoming meeting would be the final test. A conversation without illusions, only truth, to see if he truly wanted to change. Or if all this was just the final word of a man afraid of losing something he had never appreciated before. The meeting at the Guk Kui coffee shop did not go as smoothly as I had imagined. Nathan arrived early, looking tense, his eyes wavering between anticipation and fear. He tried to apologize, tried to explain, but his words lacked the necessary depth, as if he were replaying a memorized role rather than facing reality. Although he seemed to have changed, he still did not truly understand the extent of the damage he had caused. And so I realized we needed a final conversation, a meeting that was not emotional, but decisive, so that everything could be laid bare, no longer hidden behind regret or assumptions. I invited Nathan, Lauren, Richard, and Margaret to my private office at the Willow Table. This time, I wanted them to face me on the very ground I had built with my sweat and will, the land I had full control over, the place I held all the initiative. That morning, my office was strangely quiet. The four of them sat on the leather sofas facing my desk, looking awkward and tense. Nathan was the only one who dared to look directly at me, his eyes filled with guilt and fear. Lauren fiddled with her skirts, while Richard and Margaret kept their heads down, avoiding eye contact. I didn't beat around the bush. I placed the thick document on the table, the new will, and slid it toward them. "I've changed my will," I said, my voice calm but firm, echoing through the room like an unchallenged sentence. "After I die, the Willow Table will belong to Clara and Sophie. They've been with me since the beginning of my darkest days. They've given their lives, their hearts, and their precious years to keep this place alive. They deserve it." I paused, my eyes fixed on Nathan. No evasion, no mercy. "And you, Nathan, you will receive the old house on Maple Street, the place where you grew up, and enough money to start your life over, with your own hands and responsibility. I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing this to make you understand. The true worth of a person is not measured by what he has, but by how he lives, what he contributes, and how he treats others." The room seemed to freeze. The four of them were stunned, knowing that I was no longer the gentlewoman who could easily forgive everything like before. Nathan bowed his head, his hands clenched. When he looked up, his eyes were red, tears streaming down. "Mom, I'm sorry," he choked, his voice breaking like a boy facing a mistake. "I was really stupid. I'm ashamed of you, but I'm the one who should be ashamed. I never understood you, never saw what you sacrificed. I was so caught up in chasing after flashy things that I forgot about the meaningful things. I promise, I'll change, Mom." For the first time in years, I heard sincerity in that voice. No more excuses, no more panic, a heartfelt confession. I nodded slowly. "I hope so, Nathan. Sorry isn't enough. Apologies need action. I can't erase what happened because the damage you left behind is real, like scars that will never fully heal. But I can draw a line in the future, and it's up to you to cross it." I turned to Lauren, Richard, and Margaret, who had remained stoic. "And you," I said, my voice growing colder. "I hope this meeting has shown you that people are not defined by their wealth or appearance. Greatness lies in character and gratitude, not in gold-plated business cards." I stood up, a clear gesture ending the meeting. From this day forward, our relationship, if it exists, will be based on respect and honesty. If you, especially you, Nathan, truly want to mend things, the door is open. But trust is not a gift. It is something that must be built over time and with constant effort. Nathan raised his head, his eyes determined. "I understand, Mom. I will prove it." Lauren still said nothing. Her face was pale, her gaze uncertain, as if she had not yet come to terms with the shock that had just occurred. Richard and Margaret nodded vaguely, as if still struggling between anger and defeat. The meeting ended in silence, not the silence of an end, but of a beginning of something still undefined. I knew that the road to true change for Nathan was long and challenging, but I had done what I had to do. I had spoken up, I had set boundaries, and most importantly, I had taken back control of my own life. After that tense meeting at the office, a profound change occurred in my life, quietly but clearly, like a new wind blowing in my chest. It was not just a turning point, but a true liberation. The story of Eleanor Brooks, the mysterious woman behind the willow table, was no longer something to be whispered about in the dark. It spread throughout the town of Willow Creek and its surrounding areas like a wildfire from a single unyielding spark. And instead of avoiding it, I chose to face it, not reluctantly, but with my head held high. I began to show up more often at the willow table. Every morning, after a simple breakfast in my small kitchen, I drove my old Ford to the restaurant, no longer using the back door. I walked through the front door, walking with dignity, a straight back and a warm smile. I walked around the dining room, chatting with customers, sharing about the French onion soup that reminded me of my first evenings with James, or about the bread recipe we had worked on in the small kitchen. Customers, from familiar locals to curious new visitors, looked at me with a mixture of affection and respect. They came not only to enjoy the food, but also to meet me, the woman who had created a legend with her own two hands. "Mrs. Brooks, your sandwiches are amazing!" exclaimed an enthusiastic customer. I smiled. "Thank you. It's a recipe my husband and I perfected together. Every time we bake it, it brings back memories." These conversations brought me a quiet but profound joy. I no longer felt the need to hide anything. Each compliment, each look of recognition was a silent affirmation that I was on the right path, not through loudness, but through my own perseverance and kindness. The Willow Table staff, Clara, Sophie, Henry, and the new young waiters, all treated me with genuine respect. I was not just the boss, but a living example of perseverance and self-sacrifice. Sophie often came to me for advice on new menus, and Clara was always my dedicated right-hand woman, allowing me to spend more time with the customers. Henry made sure every detail in the dining room was perfect, from the fresh flowers on the tables to the soft candlelight on the old wooden walls. "We are so proud of you, Eleanor," Clara once said as we sat in her office, hot cups of coffee in hand. "You make us believe that anything is possible." I just smiled, satisfied. "You guys did a great job, too. The Willow Table is the result of all of us." A deep sense of peace, something I had never known before, now quietly permeated my mind. I no longer lived behind curtains, no longer feared the eyes of scrutiny. I was myself, the woman who had built, maintained, and now stood firm in the midst of what she had created. The burdens that had once weighed on my shoulders were slowly being lifted. I would often sit in my old office, quietly looking at the black and white photo of James and me, hand in hand, eyes sparkling with hope, and I would smile. Material things had not changed much. I still lived in a modest house, still drove the same worn-out car, but my soul now was free. On leisurely afternoons, I drove my old Ford around town, no longer to avoid people, but to enjoy each familiar street. I stopped at small cafes, chatting with the people who now knew who I was and looked at me with respect instead of suspicion. I also spent time tending to the backyard, where each blooming flower was a testament to the rebirth. I breathed in the fresh air and felt a simple joy in every cell. My life has come a long way, from being despised, hidden, to being acknowledged and appreciated. And I have come to understand that the value of a person does not need to be stamped by society. It lies in what we have lived, what we have given, what we have maintained, even when the whole world has turned its back on us. The most important thing I have learned is I do not need anyone's recognition to be myself. And now I am living the life I have chosen, more authentically, peacefully, and freely than ever before. Nathan, my son, seemed to be trying to change. Since our last meeting, he had started visiting me more often at Willow Creek, not with Lauren or her parents like he used to. He no longer bragged about his successful business ventures or his new car, but instead chose more intimate topics, asking about the restaurant, the backyard, my daily life. Once, he even offered to help me repair my old fence, something Nathan would never have considered, let alone suggested before. I saw the effort in his eyes, a little awkward, a little embarrassed, but real. Still, I kept a cautious distance. I am willing to listen, willing to give opportunities. But forgiveness is not something that comes immediately. Healing, if it comes, will need to be proven by time, by actions, not just words. Love, respect, must come from sincerity, not from fear of loss or from personal calculations. I still stand by my principles. I will not let myself be hurt again. The boundaries have been clearly drawn, and Nathan needs to learn to respect them. Eleanor, the mother, will always open her arms to her son, but Eleanor, the woman, will not let herself be taken advantage of again. The Willow Table continues to thrive under the leadership of Clara and Sophie, people I trust completely. The restaurant is no longer just a place to serve meals, but a symbol of resilience, passion, and uncompromising quality. The name Eleanor Brooks is associated not only with a successful restaurant, but also with a vivid story of a woman who overcame prejudice, overcome vulnerability, and dared to assert her values. We have expanded the back garden into an outdoor dining area and are currently planning to build a small gallery, a place to tell the history of the Willow Table and the journey of the people who have helped build this special place. My story, though simple, has become a silent lesson for Nathan and for many others. It is a reminder that people should not be judged by their flashy appearance or the size of their bank account. Their true worth lies in how they treat others, in the integrity of their actions, in the sincerity they leave behind. The legacy I have created is not just a successful restaurant or a few possessions. It is a clear message about self-respect, about dignity, about true values, things that money cannot buy. Now, I often sit in my garden in the late afternoon, sipping hot tea, quietly watching the flowers bloom in the golden sunlight. I have found peace, not the false peace that comes from trying to deny the past, but the true peace that comes from accepting yourself and your past completely. Nathan is still on his own journey. Will he truly understand that lesson, or will he continue to fall into vain illusions? Only time and his own choices will tell. As for me, I have marked my path, and that path will not change. Whatever Nathan may become, whatever his return to honesty, the legacy of the Willow Table and my story will always be an indelible reminder that money and status may bring temporary glory, but only self-respect, integrity, and true values are eternal. That is what defines you. And with all that I have been through, I can say with certainty, stay true to yourself and never let anyone underestimate you, not even the person you love the most. Thank you for listening to my story.